When I first saw the flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the pine trees that line my cabin driveway, I honestly thought this was it and my fresh start had just ended before it even began. I stood there, covered in dust, holding a moving box marked kitchen stuff, as two patrol cars slowly pulled up the gravel road. Behind them, I saw the smug faces of three people from the local HOA, arms crossed, whispering among themselves. I hadn't even finished unloading my truck, and they had already called the police. But here's the thing, what they didn't know, and what would change everything, was that the very officers they called weren't there to arrest me broken bar, they were there to welcome me home. 6 months earlier, I had sold almost everything I owned after my wife, Laura, passed away. The city had grown cold, lifeless. Every corner of our old neighborhood carried echoes of a life we built together. I needed silence, I needed space, so I bought a rundown cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow, a quiet mountain community about 2 hours from town. It wasn't much, just creaky wood, faded paint, and a roof that sighed with age, but it was mine. I spent weeks fixing it up, sanding the porch, sealing the leaks, even planting wildflowers out front like Laura used to love. It became my therapy. When I finally moved in, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a peace. That peace lasted exactly one day. On my second morning, I heard a knock on the door. Standing there were three well-dressed people, a clipboard in hand, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The woman in the center introduced herself as Cheryl, head of the Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. "Mr. Grant, we noticed some broken bar unusual activity on this property," she said, scanning my yard like she was conducting an inspection. "You're not allowed to park a moving truck overnight. It violates HOA guidelines." I frowned. I wasn't aware this cabin was part of an home. "Oh, it is," she replied, almost proudly. "Pine Hollow Estates covers the entire valley. We maintain certain standards around here." I glanced at my modest cabin, surrounded by trees and no visible neighbors. "Standards? There's barely anyone around." "That's exactly how we like it," she said sharply. That was the first sign this place wasn't going to be the peaceful sanctuary I hoped for. Over the next week, things got worse. I received notices for things that didn't even make sense: a improper fence color, unapproved garden bed, non-compliant mailbox. Every day, there was something new. And Cheryl was always there, watching. It wasn't until one afternoon, when I came home with a load of firewood, that I noticed something taped to my door. Greater than notice of occupancy violation, a unauthorized resident on HOA property. They were accusing me of squatting on my own land. I tried reasoning with them, showing them the deed, the property tax receipts, even emails from the county office verifying my ownership. But Cheryl wouldn't listen. "We've had people like you before," she said coldly. "You buy cheap land, ignore community rules, and ruin the neighborhood's image. We'll have the authorities handle it." I laughed bitterly. "Handle it? For what? Moving into my own home?" "You'll see," she replied. "The law's on our side." 2 days later came the sirens. When the officers stepped out of their vehicles, I braced myself. Cheryl stood nearby, arms folded, ready to see me hauled off. One of the officers, a tall man with kind eyes, looked at me, then at her, then back at me. "Mr. Grant?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said carefully. "Mind if we take a look at your paperwork?" "Of course." I handed him the folder with the property documents. He studied it for a moment, then smiled. "Everything seems perfectly in order." Cheryl's face twisted. "The what?" "He's not supposed to." The officer raised a hand. "Ma'am, Mr. Grant is the legal owner of this property. He has every right to be here." Her jaw dropped. But he doesn't fit the community standards." The second officer, a woman, chuckled softly. "Ma'am, community standards don't override property law." Then she turned to me and said, "Actually, Mr. Grant, a broken bar, we were just talking about you at the station. Chief said you were moving up here. He wanted us to make sure you felt welcome. He served with your wife in the volunteer fire department years ago." My heart froze. "You knew Laura?" "Yes," the officer said warmly. "She was one of the kindest people we ever worked with." "When we heard you bought a place up here," the chief said, "that man deserves peace." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I just stood there, Blinking back tears, the officers helped me unload the last of my boxes that evening, chatting, laughing, even sharing coffee on the porch afterward. Cheryl and her entourage left, fuming and defeated. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I started getting visits from other residents, quiet hellos at first, then full conversations. Turns out, most people in Pine Hollow weren't anything like the HOA board. Many were retired teachers, veterans, or families who just wanted to live quietly. They had been intimidated by Cheryl and her strict rules for years. When word got around about what happened, something in the community shifted. People began standing up for themselves, questioning fines, attending meetings, even voting to remove Cheryl and her cronies from the HOA board. The officers' report had made it clear. The board had overstepped. Within 3 months, the HOA was restructured entirely. New leadership was elected, fair, friendly, and reasonable. And for the first time, Pine Hollow truly felt like a community. One evening, months later, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The wildflowers had bloomed beautifully, their colors spilling across the yard. I could almost hear Laura's laugh in the wind. I wasn't just living in a cabin anymore. I was part of something, something that had found its heart again. That's when the same 2 officers drove by, waving. I smiled and waved back. Funny, isn't it? The people who called 911 to have me arrested a broken bar ended up helping me build a life worth staying for. Moral of the story: sometimes life tests you with conflict before giving you peace. And often, when you stand firm for what's right, not angrily, but with quiet strength, you don't just change your life via a broken bar, you change others too. Because true community isn't about control. It's about kindness, courage, and the willingness to see a stranger and greet them as a friend.